Greetings, greetings, greetings. You are now tuned into the vault. Trust Christian, know nothing, control everything. Just want to thank you for tuning in live, listening to replay. Always appreciate everybody that tunes in live, listens in the replay. This is the vault episode 346. Public education versus private education. Always appreciate everybody that tunes in live, listens in the replay. This is definitely going to be a great episode. Just going to go ahead and go straight into it. The Vault, episode 346, Public Education versus Private Education. And this episode may take people by surprise sometimes when we talk about not just private education, private school, but just private education in general. Uh, a lot of people say, well, is it private school or is it public school? And so we're going to go ahead and distinguish it from the beginning because we're aware of what a state education is, what a public education is, what the bare minimum education is in the state level. You can say, oh, the system's going bankrupt, but the system is it providing a proper education at the state level, at the public level? We have to continue to ask these questions because the statistics are not lying. The statistics are pointing out what it's producing. See, when you go through the public system, it says by the time you reach the age of 65, out of your age group, 50% of the people were supposed to be dead or dead broke. So then we get to, well, what's the other 40%, 45% of your age group from 18 to 65 in the working world, in the public West? Well, they say those people will be dependent on family members, friends, some government assistance. 40% of the population. And then we get to, well, what are the last 5% or less doing? Well, we're going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about what the private education is because it seems that some people got pretty much same education, but there are individuals, families, communities that have a private education, not public. They do what private wealth managers do because there is a private sector. People are aware that there is a private education. That's because the education is specific in the private. That's what you get in trustee training when you're dealing with the vault. Want to find out more about trustee training? Feel free to reach out Christian at trustchristian.com. Once again, that's Christian at trustchristian.com. So people say, okay, the public education. Public education says what? 50% of the people are going to be dead broke. The other 40, they're going to be dependent on family members, friends, and government assistance. Some type of handout. You hear that? We all almost say that they're indigents. As the mentors would say, they're indigents. They didn't get a proper financial education. They were workers. They worked their whole lives. They turned 65. And then we get to this, what people in the public call the age of retirement. They've moved the age of retirement for Social Security benefits. It's not just that one age anymore. They've moved it because so many people are utilizing the system. See how they have a mandate in place for Social Security? They have, that's what it's called. It's a public mandate that officers have to make sure that the last 40 can make it. Because that's what the system's holding right now. So then we get to the private education that lasts less than 10% of the population is the part of the population that is utilizing a different system. It's the private system, not the public system. These are individuals that focus on own, not to control everything. These individuals that live by a different code. Sometimes in this sector, you'll see that the education has come from families privately investing in education for their children. You also see in this sector that these individuals are sent to specific schools. Specific schools. Not necessarily a trade school, but when you see bigger business schools, you know that the bigger business schools are making a specific education. They're giving a specific education. Very unique education in and of itself because it's private. Traditionally, private means proprietary. Some part of their education is proprietary. That's why it's private. These people are properly educated in contracts. These people have what people call, on our sector, on our side, a proper financial education. See, there's so many gurus on the internet that have pieces of private information. So in turn, they've learned how to tap into the wealthy code. The wealthy code has a specific education that's being emulated. That's what's going on. So some people in the public sector will show that they have parts of private information. Sometimes they may not show you that they have parts of private information. Sometimes they sell information. You see, this is where we are. People say, oh, are you selling information? Selling information that people try to say they can get on the internet for free. You can't in the private sector. Because what's truly private is not on the internet. What's truly private? And the interesting part about the so-called internet, you know, we're just going to go ahead and tell you all, ladies and gentlemen, because you're listening to the vault. The internet's being so-called scrubbed. The internet is not as open and free as people would like it is, like it to be, or like to think that it is. You know, the internet has a just you have to be open to the fact that everything's not on the internet. Can't get every free piece of information on the internet. And so there is a proprietary private element to having a financial education because a financial education has to come from the right source. Now we know that the public education is not private. So we know the outcomes for the public education. But what are the outcomes of the private education? The outcomes of the private education are generational wealth. Passed along from one generation to the next, privately, quietly. Pass along where your family doesn't work a job for generations successively. They may go into higher levels of life, of whether it's creative endeavors, whether it's politics, uh, whether it's into massive high levels of private entrepreneurship and investing. A lot of times you may see it take a generation or two to put together a solid portfolio for the third or fourth generation to really build something on, fourth generation to build something on, and you can see that throughout the states. When you see the private education movement in its entirety, when you see private families that are able to build up, successive generations of wealth, to really have the third generation or fourth generation really move in a direction where they have large lump sums of capital that have been saved over a few generations. Not just saved, but literally invested and grown in the proper capacity so they have the proper training. You also see them live better now that they have a different standard of living. These people can eat differently. They eat differently, focusing on eating better. These are generations. Maybe first generation or second generation does buy a farm, and the third generation's on that farm, and the fourth and fifth generation are still there, building on those land equitable values that have been placed uh, inside of the family bloodline, inside of the family code, family law. Now they're governed by the private family law, not the public one. They're governed by the private family law because they've been living by private family law for generations. Appreciate Oklahoma City for tuning in live, listening to replay. Always appreciate Oklahoma City for tuning in live, listening to replay. Feel free type into the chat where you listen live from. Feel free to email Christian@trustchristian.com if you all want to reach out, consultations, or it's the end of the year. Definitely had a great year. I'm just gonna keep pushing through. So many people like to do things going on to into the new year, calendar year at least for the world and things of that nature. So private education, it's alternative education. You have to seek out alternative education sources from the public. The public has been given what's called the dumbing down effect. Each generation was supposed to build bigger and faster everything. We're seeing things be built, but we can see things get built even faster with the internet. And we're still seeing microchips being delayed. Microchips literally in 2021, what is this month? In late October, they said that there's a microchip shortage. Short areas. There's no goddamn shortages, ladies and gentlemen. This is called supply and demand. That's what it's called. Supply and demand. The crappy economics that we have to listen to, or people listen to, about supply and demand. Price gouging right now. Crimson hourglass. Whether it's shipping delays, labor delays, you're seeing the market. Private education shares that you seek out alternative financial educations that you can become financially independent. Once you become financially independent, your family has to become independently wealthy. And as your family is independently wealthy, they're able to invest properly. They're able to make proper investment decisions. They're able to build businesses properly because they're an informed family at that point. They have what's called a proper financial education. There's components to financial educations. When we talk about getting the money, everybody wants to get the money, and what people have to get is a proper financial education, which means they learn how to manage the books because they're asset managers. They're asset managers of dollars. They're asset managers of assets. They're risk managers. They're managing risk for their family. These are components of inside of what a portfolio, what it looks like. So when we're talking to families that say, oh, we want to improve our position, uh, there has to be a teamwork element in the family. When you think about it, if we're talking about building wealth from one generation to the next, that involves family. So when you talk about building wealth from one generation to the next with family, families should be very active in the process. And it can be a downfall of a family because the less family have active, the harder it's going to be to build the actual family estate. The families that do it together, the families that stick together throughout these processes, uh, they're the ones that win because they're able to muster up their energy, muster up their creativity, their minds working together and building something together. Because things that work together multiply. We don't just add, we multiply. So we start seeing that in the private sector that you see It's definitely a family-oriented environment. It's very much so big picture thinking. Private education focuses on it's o- it's okay to take risk. It's almost okay to make a mistake. You got to be willing to strike out so you can hit a home run. These are the analogies in the private sector, the private education that is given to people in our sector. Private families, private education is together. We've mentioned this. So now that we know that the education is tied to the family, this is where you end up seeing a lot of families work together out of specific entities, sometimes the same entities, because it's beneficial for families to work together. But a lot of times you can see the separateness in families uh, in different categories. When we talk about the public side, we already know 50% of them are going to be dead broke. The other 40%, they're going to be dependents. They're the indigents of the society. They're the ones that, if there was the 10% paying taxes, then they would be paying taxes for the other 40% to live. Because the 40% at that point, at the age of 65, they're they're so they were making 100% of their money. Now they have to live on half of that. They're not able to live on half that. Who do you think is paying the other half? Friends, family, and the government. So let's talk about the private education that says no. When you reach 65, you're adding another 100%. How is it that the private education allows you to make money in a recession? How is it that the private education allows you to make money in what's called a bad market or a good market? How is it? It's because a private education shares with you how money works, how contracts work. Most importantly, it gives you an education to focus on your personality type. It's not about what education you have, it's about your personality type and how do you manage the information. Once again, it's not about the information, it's about how your personality type manages the information. How do you manage the information? Are you overwhelmed? Are you enamored by the information? There's some personality types that eat it up. That's the 10%. But so many people think the 10% is just one type of personality. It's not. It's all different type of personalities in the 1%, in the 10% that manage the 90% of the wealth. 95% of the wealth. Why? Because it's about how they manage the information. They're in tune with themselves, so they're able to manage the information. That's what a private education gives these individuals. It gives them the ability to focus on their strengths, not their weaknesses. That's what it focuses on. It helps us focus on those things. So being in the private sector, private education, with the private families, having a proper financial education. If you don't learn from the individuals that wrote the rules, you're just a player in the game. But once you know the rules to the game, because you learn from the rule makers, you can play the game from a ruler position, not just a player position. Those positions are earned because you've taken the time out to study what's called the system. There is a system that's in place. It's a system that has processes to become wealthy and the procedures to keep it, protect it, and pass it along from one generation to the next. There is a system. There's processes. And there's procedures. The private education helps individuals think in these manners. To grow. To know. private education is focused on different outcomes than the public education. The public education is the so-called take care of everybody. Each one teach one. In the private sector, it's called you know what you know and you do what you know. But not too many people in the private sector share what they know unless it's mutually beneficial. See, people in the private sector understand value exchange. People in the private sector, we're trained to think about opportunity cost loss. We're trained to think about what's an asset. What's your greatest asset? What's your greatest liability? It teaches you management, behavioral management, risk management, time management. It's a private education. That's the difference. Private education is something you get by investing in yourself, not spending money on clothes or spending money at the movies or spending money and spending money. Instead, it's an investment. It's supposed to be a return on what? Investment. Sometimes people think they could take a loss in an investment, and that's the public side. You got to write down what you lost and how you learned from a loss. What did you learn from the loss? The private education shares with you balance sheet. Appreciate everybody for tuning in live, listening, replay. Always appreciate everybody that tunes in live, listen, replay. Feel free to reach out, Christian@trustchristian.com. We're going to end the year all strong. Look forward to hearing from you all. Peace. Enjoy.